J.D. Vance told his security to remove the royal
guard. If you do not
guard.
comply
Then the
immediately,
guard took one step
the consequences
forward.
will be severe.
The grand hall before him seemed to shimmer with an almost unreal elegance. Marble floors stretched endlessly in front of him, polished so brightly that every step echoed with a crisp, clear sound. Tall pillars lined the room, carved with intricate patterns that told stories from centuries past. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, sparkling like captured sunlight, while tapestries of old battles and royal ceremonies adorned the walls. The atmosphere was one of authority, tradition, and expectation. Flanking the entrance were the royal guards, standing rigid and still. Their armor shone with a metallic brilliance, each piece perfectly aligned, each emblem precise. The guards carried long, ceremonial spears, their tips gleaming under the chandelier's light. The sight of them commanded attention and respect. These were not ordinary guards. They were the living embodiment of centuries of tradition, a symbol of the royalty and history they served. Their presence was meant to impress, to remind every visitor of the importance of this place and the weight of the legacy that resided within it. Vance's security team moved quickly, forming a protective circle around him. They were trained for rapid responses, assessing threats even before they could appear. Their eyes scanned every corner of the hall, their movements precise, silent, and calculated. The contrast between the modern security team and the ceremonial guards could not have been starker. One represented efficiency, control, and the world of politics. The other represented discipline, heritage, and unwavering tradition. As he walked forward, Vance gave a quiet command to his team, his voice barely audible yet firm. "Remove the royal guard from our path." It was not an order given out of disrespect, but out of practicality. Vance had always preferred straightforward action over ceremonial delays. He didn't want unnecessary formality to interfere with his purpose. In his mind, the meeting ahead was urgent, and he wanted to move quickly and efficiently. His security team stepped forward. They were prepared to execute his order without hesitation, moving in to guide the guards aside. But something unexpected happened. The royal guard did not move immediately. Instead, one guard, standing slightly ahead of the others, took a single step forward. The motion was slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic in its precision. It was a small gesture, but in that moment it carried enormous weight. Vance paused. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed to echo in the vast hall, mingling with the faint shuffle of armor from the guard. That single step, almost imperceptible, was a message. It was not a challenge in the usual sense. It was a reminder of authority, of history, and of the silent rules that govern this place. The air seemed heavier, as if the room itself had recognized the significance of that small movement. The other guards remained perfectly still, their eyes forward, their expressions neutral but unwavering. There was no hostility in their stance, only a calm confidence that came from knowing one's role and the centuries of training behind it. Vance understood immediately that this was not about confrontation. It was about respect and acknowledgement. The guard's single step forward was a test, a subtle question. Would the man before us understand the weight of tradition, or would he dismiss it entirely? Vance's security team halted, caught off guard by the unexpected pause. They were trained to act quickly, to clear paths, and to ensure the safety of the person they protected. But this was no ordinary obstruction. Their usual strategies did not apply here. The guard was not an enemy nor a threat. He was a symbol, a living reminder of the rules and rituals that had governed this hall for generations. The team exchanged brief glances, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual situation. Vance took a deep breath, his mind racing. He realized that in this moment he faced a choice. He could insist on his command, forcing the guard aside and risking tension or even embarrassment. Or he could pause, assess, and consider the deeper meaning behind the gesture. Leadership, he reminded himself, was not just about asserting power. Sometimes it was about understanding the forces at play and navigating them with intelligence and tact. He stepped forward slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. Every eye in the hall seemed to follow him, from the polished marble floors to the towering chandeliers above. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the silent expectations of countless generations of guards and courtiers. The guard who had taken that single step remained unmoved, a pillar of calm in the center of the room. Vance realized that this was more than a test of patience, it was a test of character. For a few moments, nothing happened except the sound of their breathing, the faint clink of armor, and the distant echoes of the grand hall. Then, almost imperceptibly, Vance nodded slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement. It was not an act of submission, nor a sign of weakness. It was recognition, a silent agreement that he understood the importance of the moment. The guard, sensing the acknowledgement, did not advance further. The other guards, seeing that the situation had been diffused, relaxed slightly, though they remained in their positions. Vance's security team, relieved, adjusted their formation to match his pace rather than trying to impose control. The dynamic had shifted. What could have been a clash had transformed into a moment of mutual understanding. Vance continued forward, each step echoing in the vast hall. The grandeur of the space was overwhelming, yet he felt a strange sense of clarity. He was a visitor here, yes, but not a disrespectful one. He understood that true leadership sometimes required humility, that acknowledging the authority of others, even in symbolic ways, could be far more powerful than asserting dominance. As he walked, Vance's mind wandered briefly to the centuries of history contained within the walls. He thought about the countless visitors, dignitaries, and rulers who had faced similar moments of silent judgment. Each step of the guard, each pause, each glance had been honed by tradition, by repetition, by an unbroken chain of human experience. And now, in this brief intersection of past and present, he had become part of that ongoing story. By the time he reached the center of the hall, where the meeting would take place, the tension had eased. The single step of the guard had set the tone for what would follow, a subtle reminder that respect and understanding were as important as authority and power. Vance felt a mixture of relief and admiration. He had anticipated a simple logistical challenge, yet he had been presented with a profound lesson in perception and human interaction. The encounter lingered in his mind. It was not dramatic in the conventional sense. There was no shouting, no confrontation, but it had a weight that was impossible to ignore. The guard had not blocked him, he had guided him, testing his awareness, patience, and respect. The story of that single step would stay with Vance far longer than any security protocol or logistical maneuver could have. As the meeting began, Vance glanced once more at the guards, now standing in perfect formation. Their discipline and calm professionalism left an impression that words could not capture. He realized that in every aspect of life, there were moments where subtlety mattered more than force, where understanding mattered more than command. The Royal Guard had taught him this lesson in the simplest of ways. One measured step, taken with purpose and intention, could convey more than 1,000 words. Even as discussions unfolded, agreements were made, and plans were set into motion, Vance's mind kept returning to that moment. It was a reminder of the balance between tradition and modernity, between respect and efficiency, between strength and humility. He knew that when he recounted the story later, it would serve not only as an anecdote but as a principle. That leadership and wisdom often reveal themselves in the quietest of gestures, in the spaces between action and reaction, in the unspoken understanding of those who walk the same path. By the time Vance left the hall, the sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the marble floors. He paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the grandeur once more. The Royal Guard stood as they had before, vigilant, composed, and unyielding. But now he felt a connection to them, a recognition of their purpose and their role. That single step had changed everything. It had turned a routine arrival into an unforgettable encounter, a lesson in history, respect, and human perception. And as the car doors closed and he drove away, Vance silently vowed to remember it, not just as a story of ceremonial protocol, but as a lesson in patience, awareness, and the quiet power of understanding. The air in the grand hall seemed to hum with quiet energy as J.D. Vance moved forward, the echoes of his footsteps bouncing off the polished marble. The earlier encounter with the Royal Guard's single step had left a lasting impression on him. Every detail of that brief moment, the calm authority of the guard, the careful pause of his team, and the subtle tension in the room, had etched itself into his memory. But now, as he continued deeper into the hall, he realized that the situation was far from resolved. This was a place where tradition held power, and every action, no matter how small, was being watched and interpreted. The guard who had taken that single step remained in his position, a silent sentinel of discipline and history. Vance's team, trained to anticipate threats and assert control, slowed their pace, adapting to the subtle signals of the moment. They understood instinctively that this was no ordinary security challenge. Their usual tactics, pushing forward, creating a physical barrier, or giving sharp commands, would have disrupted the balance of the room. Instead, they mirrored Vance's measured movements, staying alert while showing restraint. Vance's mind raced as he considered the implications. He had come here expecting a simple meeting, a clear agenda, and routine logistics. Yet the interaction with the guard had forced him to confront something deeper: the invisible codes of authority and respect that govern this space. This was not about immediate power or control. It was about understanding the subtleties of human behavior, the traditions of a centuries-old institution, and the delicate dance between modern efficiency and ceremonial expectation. He took another deliberate step forward, careful not to appear aggressive or dismissive. The guard's gaze remained steady, unblinking, yet there was a sense of calm strength in it. Vance sensed that this single step, taken so quietly, was not a challenge to be met with force, but an invitation to engage in a form of communication beyond words. It was as if the guard were silently asking, "Do you understand the weight of what you are stepping into?" Vance's security team adjusted their positions slightly, creating a subtle barrier without closing off the path entirely. They were ready to intervene if necessary, but they understood that the situation required patience and observation rather than immediate action. The team's professionalism and adaptability impressed Vance. He knew that their discipline and awareness had prevented what could have easily escalated into confusion or tension. As he continued, Vance's thoughts drifted to the centuries of history embedded in the hall. Each marble pillar, each carved emblem, and each tapestry told a story of past leaders, visitors, and ceremonial events. The royal guard was not merely a protector of space, but a guardian of memory and tradition. Their presence was a reminder that actions, even small ones, carried significance beyond the immediate moment. Vance realized that in the modern world it was easy to focus on speed, efficiency, and control, but here, he was learning the importance of subtlety, timing, and respect. The guard took no further steps, yet the silent tension lingered. Vance sensed that the moment required more than acknowledgement. It required understanding. Leadership, he reflected, was often demonstrated not through commands or force, but through awareness and careful decision-making. The guard's step was a quiet test, a measure of Vance's ability to navigate a complex social and historical landscape without disregarding its rules. He paused for a brief second, giving himself a moment to process the situation. He made a conscious effort to relax his shoulders, soften his gaze, and project calm confidence. It was important that neither the guard nor his own team interpreted hesitation as weakness or aggression. This delicate balance required awareness, patience, and humility, qualities that were not always necessary in the fast-paced political environments Vance was accustomed to. The guard's stance was unyielding yet respectful. He did not move to block Vance or assert dominance, but his single step had changed the dynamics of the room entirely. Vance realized that authority was not always a matter of who moved first or commanded louder. Sometimes, it was expressed through patience, presence, and the quiet demonstration of purpose. The guard's step was both a reminder and a challenge, asking Vance to rise to the moment by showing insight and adaptability rather than confrontation. Vance took another step forward, slowly bridging the physical and symbolic distance between himself and the guard. Each movement felt deliberate, calculated to communicate acknowledgement rather than defiance. The room seemed to respond, the tension subtly easing as the silent dialogue continued. His team mirrored his approach, maintaining readiness without imposing force, blending modern security discipline with respect for tradition. As he walked, Vance considered the broader implications. This encounter was not simply about a ceremonial hallway or a ceremonial guard. It was a microcosm of the challenges he faced in life and leadership. In every situation, there were individuals and systems bound by rules, history, or personal values that could not be ignored. Success required the ability to understand these forces, to navigate them thoughtfully, and to act in ways that balanced authority with respect. Vance's mind recalled lessons from his own life, times when he had misjudged situations by moving too quickly or relying solely on force or logic. Those experiences had taught him that patience and observation often revealed more than immediate action. Here, in the presence of the royal guard, that lesson was being reinforced in real time. The single step taken by the guard was a small but powerful demonstration of the principle. Sometimes, the quietest actions carry the greatest weight. He reached a point where he could see the meeting area more clearly. The space was arranged with meticulous care, chairs set around a polished table, light streaming in from tall windows, and intricate designs covering every surface. The environment itself conveyed order, precision, and tradition. Vance understood that entering this space without understanding its meaning could undermine both his credibility and the purpose of the meeting. The guard continued to watch him, unwavering. Vance noticed the subtle details, the slight shift in posture, the controlled breathing, the measured stance, all signals that spoke of years of training, discipline, and experience. These small gestures, almost invisible to an untrained eye, communicated authority, patience, and awareness. Vance realized that he had to match that level of observation and presence if he wanted the interaction to unfold successfully. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. It was a simple motion, but in the context of the hall, the guard, and the centuries of tradition, it carried profound meaning. The guard's stance softened subtly, a sign that the message had been received. The tension that had filled the room moments before began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of mutual understanding. Vance's security team adjusted their formation, now walking slightly behind him to maintain protective coverage while allowing him to lead the interaction. The team's flexibility was crucial. Their ability to interpret subtle social cues and adapt in real time allowed Vance to navigate the ceremonial environment without confrontation. This moment reinforced for him the importance of teamwork, observation, and patience in achieving goals while maintaining respect and composure. The walk through the hall continued with a quiet rhythm, each step echoing in the space, each glance carrying weight. Vance reflected on the lessons being presented to him, not through lectures or speeches, but through action and presence. The guard's single step had sparked a chain of understanding, demonstrating that leadership required perception, respect, and an awareness of context. In a sense, the encounter was a lesson in emotional intelligence, teaching Vance how to read situations and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. As he approached the table where the meeting would take place, Vance felt a sense of calm confidence. He had learned that the true measure of leadership was not how forcefully one could command a situation, but how effectively one could navigate complexity with awareness and respect. The guard's single step, initially a surprise, had become a guiding principle. Understanding and acknowledgement often opened doors that force alone could not. When he finally reached the center of the hall, Vance paused once more, taking in the full scope of the environment. The polished floors, the towering pillars, the intricate tapestries, and the ever-watchful royal guard. Each element was a reminder that actions were amplified by context, that every movement carried meaning beyond immediate perception. He felt a deep respect for the traditions represented here and an awareness of the role he now played within that continuum. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The room held its breath, the silence filled with anticipation and reflection. Vance knew that the encounter would remain with him long after he left the hall. It was not a moment of confrontation or triumph, but a quiet lesson in respect, observation, and the power of subtle action. The guard had tested him, not with aggression but with presence, and he had risen to that test by recognizing and responding appropriately. As the meeting began and discussions unfolded, Vance carried the awareness of the guard's lesson with him. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was now informed by the understanding that authority was multifaceted, that respect and recognition were as important as action and decision-making, and that navigating complex situations required both humility and insight. By the time the first phase of the meeting concluded, Vance's initial tension had transformed into a sense of accomplishment and clarity. The Royal Guard remained in their positions, their presence a constant reminder of the values and history that shaped the environment. Vance knew that he had not simply navigated a ceremonial challenge. He had gained a deeper appreciation for the balance between tradition and modernity, between authority and respect, between action and understanding. As he left the immediate area, Vance reflected on the journey through the hall. The single step of the guard had been a catalyst for a chain of insights, demonstrating that even the smallest actions could carry profound meaning. Leadership, he realized, was not about dominance alone, but about perception, awareness, and the ability to adapt to circumstances with integrity and respect. J.D. Vance had barely finished processing the lessons of the Grand Hall when the next part of his journey began. The initial tension with the Royal Guard had faded, replaced by a cautious understanding, but Vance knew that the real challenge was only beginning. The space around him seemed alive with history and expectation, every sound amplified by the vastness of the room. The echoes of footsteps, soft murmurs of staff, and faint clicks of polished shoes created a rhythm that made him aware of the delicate balance of authority and tradition that existed here. He took another careful step forward, aware that each movement was being watched. The Royal Guard, still standing perfectly aligned, maintained their silent vigilance. Their posture was unwavering, their eyes fixed yet not threatening, a constant reminder of the disciplined legacy they carried. For Vance, the presence of these guards had become more than ceremonial. It was almost as if they were a test of his composure, awareness, and understanding. How he conducted himself here would reflect not only on him, but also on the respect he held for the institution and its centuries of tradition. Vance's security team continued to move around him like shadows, alert and ready, yet cautious. They had learned quickly that this was not an environment for overt action or force. Each member of the team adjusted to the rhythm of the hall, synchronizing their steps to maintain protection without creating disruption. It was a delicate balance, one that required observation, patience, and an understanding that sometimes the best action was no action at all. Vance glanced briefly at them, appreciating the professionalism and adaptability that allowed him to focus on the moment at hand. As he walked further into the hall, he noticed the intricate details of the architecture around him. Every pillar, every carving, and every piece of artwork told a story of dedication, history, and human achievement. The tapestries depicted battles, celebrations, and moments of diplomacy, each thread a testament to skill and patience. Vance realized that this environment demanded a certain mindfulness, an awareness that each gesture, each word, and each decision could have meaning far beyond its immediate impact. The guard who had taken the first step forward remained an anchor in the space, a constant presence of calm authority. Vance observed him closely, noticing the subtle signals that communicated control without aggression. The slight shift of weight, the measured breathing, the unwavering focus. These small gestures revealed the depth of training and discipline behind the ceremonial role. For Vance, it was a moment of realization. Leadership and respect were not always demonstrated through commands or visible power. Sometimes they were expressed quietly, through presence, intention, and timing. A soft murmur of voices from the staff indicated that the meeting setup was nearly complete. Vance's team maintained their positions, eyes scanning for any potential disruption while allowing the ceremonial rhythm of the space to continue uninterrupted. The contrast between modern security protocols and centuries-old traditions was striking, yet in this moment, they coexisted seamlessly. The modern world of politics and the ancient world of ceremony had intersected, and Vance was at the center, learning how to navigate both. He reached the table where discussions would take place and paused. This was the heart of the hall, the space where decisions would be made and alliances would be formed. The polished surface reflected the light from the tall windows, creating a sense of openness and clarity. Chairs were arranged with precision, each placement intentional, signaling hierarchy, respect, and protocol. Vance understood that stepping into this space without awareness could undermine the respect he had just begun to earn. He took a deep breath and continued, ensuring that his movements were deliberate and measured. The Royal Guard remained stationed around the perimeter, their eyes occasionally flicking to one another in silent communication. Vance noticed the precision in their movements, the way they maintained alignment without appearing stiff or unnatural. It was a reminder that discipline could be both strong and flexible, that control did not always require visible effort. The guard's earlier step, a simple but powerful gesture, had already set the tone, and now the ongoing presence of these disciplined figures reinforced it continuously. As he approached the center of the room, Vance reflected on the lessons from the first encounter. The guard's step had taught him patience, observation, and respect. Now, as he moved deeper into the hall, he realized that the true challenge was understanding the subtle interplay of authority, perception, and history. Each person in the room, each protocol followed, was a part of a larger system, a web of expectation, tradition, and human behavior that required careful navigation. Vance's mind wandered briefly to previous experiences in his life where subtlety had mattered more than force. He recalled moments when a quiet gesture, a thoughtful word, or a patient pause had diffused tension or opened doors that would otherwise remain closed. Those lessons now felt amplified, as if the Grand Hall and its guards were reinforcing truths he had learned through experience. Leadership was not only about action, but also about awareness, perception, and the ability to adapt. A soft shift in the room's atmosphere indicated that the ceremonial preparations were nearly complete. Staff members moved with quiet efficiency, setting documents, arranging seating, and ensuring that everything adhered to tradition. Vance's team observed respectfully, understanding that interference could be misinterpreted as disrespect. This delicate coordination between modern security and centuries-old ceremonial order fascinated him, highlighting how different systems could coexist when approached thoughtfully. He reached the table and paused once more, allowing himself a moment to observe the entire space. The combination of architecture, ceremonial protocol, and disciplined presence of the guards created an environment that demanded respect. Vance understood that his every word, every movement, and every gesture in this space would be interpreted not only for its immediate purpose, but also for the respect it conveyed toward history, authority, and tradition. The guard who had taken the initial step remained the focal point of the ceremonial presence. Vance studied him carefully, noticing the subtle ways in which he communicated authority without dominating the space. The slight tilt of his head, the controlled positioning of his feet, and the calm steadiness of his gaze all conveyed confidence and awareness. It was a demonstration of silent leadership, one that did not require speech or force to command respect. Vance felt a sense of admiration, realizing that the guard's actions were teaching him more about leadership than any manual or lecture ever could. Vance took a final deliberate step forward and sat at the designated position. The table's polished surface reflected his image, merging his presence with the room's grandeur. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not because he had asserted authority or moved the guard aside, but because he had navigated the moment with awareness, respect, and composure. The single step of the guard, which had initially caused hesitation, now felt like a silent partnership in understanding, a subtle acknowledgement that tradition and modern leadership could coexist. Discussions began with staff members providing updates and documents being presented. Vance listened intently, observing both the content and the subtle social cues that accompanied it. The Royal Guard's presence remained a constant, reminding him that the environment carried weight beyond the immediate conversation. Their disciplined stance communicated calm authority, signaling that while the meeting was underway, the principles of respect, order, and tradition remained paramount. Throughout the conversation, Vance remained conscious of the balance he needed to maintain. He spoke clearly and respectfully, acknowledging the contributions of others while asserting his own perspective when necessary. The lessons from the guard's single step guided his approach, reminding him to act with patience and awareness rather than impulsively or forcefully. Each gesture, each word, and each pause was an exercise in careful navigation of both human interaction and ceremonial expectation. As the meeting progressed, Vance noticed that the initial tension had transformed into a productive rhythm. Staff members and guards alike operated within their roles, creating an environment of efficiency and respect. The Royal Guard's continued presence reinforced the importance of discipline and awareness, and Vance felt increasingly confident in his ability to engage with both modern challenges and ceremonial tradition. At one point, a staff member approached with an unexpected question, one that required immediate attention and careful response. Vance reflected briefly, recalling the lessons of observation and patience. He responded thoughtfully, ensuring that his answer addressed the practical concern while respecting the ceremonial context of the space. The response was met with nods of approval, further reinforcing his understanding of the delicate balance between action and awareness. As the first phase of the meeting concluded, Vance stood and acknowledged the royal guard with a subtle nod. The guard's gaze remained steady, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath once more. Then, in a gesture almost imperceptible, the guard adjusted his stance slightly, signaling recognition and approval. It was a quiet but profound acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that Vance had navigated the ceremonial environment successfully. With the meeting moving forward, Vance felt a deep sense of clarity. The challenges of the hall, the tension, the tradition, and the ceremonial expectations had become lessons in awareness, patience, and respect. He realized that leadership was not always about asserting control, but about understanding context, observing carefully, and responding thoughtfully. The single step of the guard had transformed from a moment of tension into a guiding principle, shaping his approach to both the meeting and his broader responsibilities. As the discussion continued, Vance reflected on how easily misunderstandings could occur if one ignored the subtle cues of context and tradition. Here, in this grand hall, every detail mattered: the alignment of chairs, the position of the guards, and the cadence of conversation. Success required not only knowledge and preparation, but also awareness, adaptability, and respect for the forces at play. By the time the meeting concluded, Vance had internalized the lessons of the hall. He had observed, adapted, and engaged thoughtfully, earning both respect and understanding without confrontation. The royal guard remained in their positions, a constant reminder of the principles he had learned. The single step that had begun the encounter now seemed almost symbolic, a demonstration of how small, deliberate actions could guide behavior, influence perception, and foster respect. Vance left the table with a sense of accomplishment and humility. The encounter had been more than a ceremonial interaction. It was a lesson in leadership, perception, and the quiet power of presence. The royal guard had taught him, without a single word, that understanding and awareness often mattered more than action alone, and that navigating complexity with patience and respect could achieve results far beyond what force or command could accomplish. J.D. Vance took a slow, deliberate step toward the exit of the grand hall, reflecting on the events of the day. The lessons he had learned in the space of a few short hours felt far deeper than he could have imagined. The single step of the royal guard that had initially caught him off guard had become a symbol of insight, patience, and respect, lessons he would carry with him far beyond this building. Every detail of the hall, every motion of the guards, and every subtle interaction had left a lasting impression on him. It was a reminder that leadership and understanding were often expressed not through force or authority, but through observation, respect, and awareness. As he moved forward, Vance thought about the delicate balance he had observed between tradition and modernity. On one side was the royal guard, a living embodiment of centuries of ceremonial discipline and history. On the other was his own team, trained for immediate response, efficiency, and protection. These two worlds coexisted in the same space, and it was the recognition of this coexistence that had allowed the encounter to unfold successfully. Vance realized that life, in many ways, mirrored this dynamic. Understanding and harmony often required navigating multiple perspectives at once. The royal guards remained vigilant, their movements precise and controlled, a living testament to discipline and honor. Vance noticed small details that he had previously overlooked: the way their eyes scanned the room without showing strain, the subtle shifts in posture as they adjusted to the rhythm of the hall, the quiet communication among them that required no words. It was a reminder that mastery was often invisible, a product of training, patience, and understanding. Vance felt a quiet admiration for their dedication. He understood that the hall, the guards, and the traditions represented far more than ceremony. They were a living history, a foundation upon which the present operated. As he walked, Vance's mind returned to the earlier moment of tension, the single step that had caused hesitation and reflection. That small gesture, simple as it appeared, had set the tone for the entire encounter. It had reminded him that respect and understanding could achieve more than confrontation or authority alone. Leadership, he realized, was not simply about moving forward, giving commands, or asserting control. It was about perceiving the unspoken rules, reading the context, and responding with awareness and integrity. His security team followed at a careful distance, their presence a silent support rather than an overt show of power. They understood, as Vance now did, that the real power of the day lay not in force or intervention, but in observation and judgment. Every member of the team had adapted quickly, blending their skills with the rhythm of the ceremonial environment. Vance felt gratitude and pride for their discipline and insight, recognizing that teamwork and mutual understanding were as crucial as any individual action. As he neared the exit, Vance paused for a moment to take in the hall one final time. The chandeliers sparkled brilliantly, casting intricate shadows on the marble floor. The tall pillars seemed to stretch endlessly, each carved with stories of triumph, diplomacy, and legacy. Tapestries adorned with historical events hung with silent dignity, narrating tales of courage, wisdom, and leadership. Every element of the room seemed to command reflection, and Vance felt that he was leaving more than a physical space. He was stepping away from an experience that had reshaped his understanding of respect, authority, and human interaction. He glanced at the royal guard who had initially stepped forward. The guard's gaze met his, and for the briefest moment there was mutual acknowledgement. No words were needed, the shared understanding spoke volumes. The guard's presence, once a source of tension, had become a guiding principle, a reminder of how small, deliberate actions could influence outcomes and shape perceptions. Vance recognized that this moment would remain with him for years, a touchstone for situations in which patience, awareness, and subtlety would be required. Stepping outside, Vance was greeted by the soft warmth of the afternoon sun. The grandeur of the hall seemed a world away, yet the lessons he had learned continued to resonate. Leadership, he reflected, was not only about decisiveness or action, but also about humility, understanding, and the ability to read context. The guard's single step had symbolized these truths perfectly. It was a simple act, yet its impact was profound. He walked to the waiting car, accompanied by his security team, each step measured and deliberate. They moved in unison, a reflection of the harmony that Vance had learned to cultivate in the hall. He thought about the importance of awareness in every sphere of life, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships. Moments like these, seemingly small and fleeting, could carry lessons that were transformative, shaping decisions, behaviors, and attitudes for years to come. As the car doors closed, Vance allowed himself a moment of reflection. The hall, the guards, and the experience had taught him that authority and respect were intertwined. One could not exist meaningfully without the other. The guard's presence had reminded him that silent strength, observation, and understanding often spoke louder than any command or assertion of power. In life, he realized, those who could navigate the subtle interplay of these forces were often the most effective leaders. During the drive away from the building, Vance continued to think about the lessons embedded in the ceremonial encounter. He considered how easily misunderstandings could arise when one ignored context, history, or the perspectives of others. The guard's step had been a simple yet powerful reminder that even in moments of high stakes, careful observation and thoughtful response could guide outcomes far more effectively than force or impatience. Vance's thoughts turned to the people he led, the teams he worked with, and the communities he served. He realized that the principles of respect, awareness, and patience were universal. Leadership required understanding the nuances of human behavior, the unseen rules that guided interactions, and the value of deliberate, thoughtful action. The encounter with the Royal Guard had crystallized these lessons in a way that no textbook or lecture could. As the cityscape approached, Vance's mind wandered to future challenges. He thought about negotiations, public interactions, and complex situations where subtle cues could make the difference between success and failure. The guard's step, a seemingly minor gesture, had become a symbol of insight and preparation, a reminder to remain observant, respectful, and deliberate in every situation. Leadership, he realized, was not a matter of authority alone, but of awareness, judgment, and adaptability. Arriving at his destination, Vance stepped out of the car and took a final look back at the building where the encounter had unfolded. The lessons of the hall, the guards, and the single step would remain with him, a guiding principle for his actions and decisions. He understood that leadership, influence, and respect were not measured solely by control or force, but by perception, patience, and thoughtful engagement. He met briefly with his team, sharing reflections and insights from the day. They discussed how observation, awareness, and respect had guided their actions, and how similar principles could be applied in other contexts. The conversation reinforced the lessons of the day. That leadership was as much about understanding as it was about action, and that subtle gestures could carry profound meaning. Vance returned to his office later that evening, carrying a sense of clarity and perspective. The Grand Hall and the Royal Guard had offered more than a ceremonial encounter. They had provided a real-world lesson in discipline, respect, and effective leadership. He took notes for himself, documenting the experience and the insights he had gained, recognizing that such moments were rare but invaluable. As night fell, Vance reflected on the overarching lesson, that life often presents tests in quiet, unexpected ways. The single step of a royal guard, taken with deliberate calm, had transformed what could have been a routine encounter into a profound lesson in observation, awareness, and respect. Leadership, he realized, was less about asserting control and more about understanding context, responding thoughtfully, and balancing authority with humility. He thought about the broader implications for his career, relationships, and personal growth. The experience had reinforced the importance of patience, attention to detail, and the ability to navigate complex situations with insight. The guard's step, though brief, had taught a lesson that extended far beyond the walls of the hall, a reminder that small actions, when guided by purpose and discipline, could influence outcomes in meaningful ways. Before retiring for the night, Vance took one final moment of reflection. He pictured the Grand Hall, the disciplined presence of the guards, and the calm authority they embodied. He understood that leadership was not defined by immediate victories or visible displays of power, but by the ability to read, respond, and adapt to the world with awareness, respect, and integrity. The encounter had been transformative, offering lessons that would guide his actions, decisions, and perspective for years to come. Vance knew that when he recounted this experience to others, it would not only be a story about ceremonial tradition or security protocols. It would be a story about the value of observation, patience, and understanding. The Royal Guard had offered him a living lesson in leadership, demonstrating that even a single, deliberate step could carry wisdom, influence, and insight far beyond its immediate moment. He finally allowed himself to relax, confident that the lessons of the day had been fully absorbed. The guard's single step, once a moment of tension and uncertainty, had become a symbol of quiet power, thoughtful leadership, and enduring respect. And as he closed his eyes that night, Vance felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected teacher, the silent lesson, and the profound impact of a simple, deliberate action that had changed his perspective forever.